All right, I can see that we are live. Yep. Welcome everyone. Let me just... Hey, I can see that we are 2 people now on YouTube. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Still waiting for a few more people to join. Okay, I can see that we are 3 people watching now. So maybe I'll start. It's almost 4:05. Hey, Geoffrey, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, I think I'll slowly start, and maybe more people will join, like in a few minutes. So take a seat. Yeah, feel free to do like Geoffrey and say hello in the chat. So yeah, today, so maybe I can quickly, while we're waiting for other people, if there is someone completely new to the lab watching a replay or watching with us right now, just a reminder that what the Plan B Labs Lightning is. Basically, the idea is to have a place which is first and foremost a Telegram group to which you have the invitation link presented as a QR code here. And on top of this Telegram group, there are regular live sessions like the one we are doing right now, where we discuss new developments in Lightning. We talk about all kind of stuff, mostly quite technical stuff, because the goal is to have here to discuss more technical aspects of the Lightning Network protocol, and not so much, for example, business aspects, but everything is can be a subject. And the idea is also to have some to have a hands-on experience, so to try to develop stuff, to try to do some little exercises. We did a session of that 2 weeks ago, so last session, where we reviewed some exercises, and we'll have some more in the coming weeks. But right now, today, it's more of news recap session, and we will be doing a deep dive on some recent release from Bitcoin Core, and to see what it can bring to Lightning. So that's today's subject is a deep dive on fee bumping of Lightning transactions, transaction pinning, and ephemeral anchors. So we'll see what this all means in a few in the coming hour, I guess. Feel free to interrupt to ask questions. So for general discussion, how this works is that you can drop your questions in the YouTube chat. You can drop questions on the Telegram group. There is a live chat channel in the Telegram group where you can ask questions during the live. And you can also ask to join me on stage so that we can have a voice-to-voice discussion. You don't have necessarily to show your face. For example, if you don't want to, it's completely fine if it's voice only. But if you do want to join me, feel free to ask, and I'll send you a link, and we could have a more a richer discussion this way, if you want. So today's deep dive, and feel free to tell me also if something is not working great. For example, if my microphone is too low or anything like that. So let's start with our deep dive on the recent Bitcoin Core 29.0 release. Also the less recent 28.0 release, which also brought some interesting stuff, but the two are linked, and so that's why we waited for 29.0 to drop before covering the subject in a deep dive like we are doing today. So let's jump right into the topic. So I see that a few other people have joined. So welcome. Today we're going to talk about how you can fee bump a Lightning channel closing transaction, and it's linked to a recent Bitcoin Core release, which is namely 29.0, which was released, I think, last week. So what does a typical commitment transaction look like today? So today meaning before we take the new developments that version 29.0 of Bitcoin Core added, and we use them into the Lightning specification and into Lightning implementations. Because right now, this looks like this. So as of the 22nd of April, 2025. So typical commitment transaction is basically an on-chain Bitcoin transaction that spends funds from the output that represents the Lightning channel, and then dispatches those funds into several outputs. There are typically two main outputs. which are output Alice and output Bob. So it's, for example, if the channel partners are named Alice and Bob, which is the common example that we are taking a lot of the time. And then if there is any in-flight payment inside this channel, you'll have one or many HTLC outputs. So you have one HTLC output per in-flight payment. So this can be of various sizes. And then you have two additional outputs, one for Alice and one for Bob, which are called anchor outputs. And basically, when this commitment transaction is published, so that means that we are doing a force close of the channel. So one of the parties, either Alice or Bob, decided to close the channel and publishes the last state of the channel on chain. So the last commitment transaction. And so when they publish, when they broadcast this transaction in the network, basically all the outputs are blocked by a one block relative time lock, except the two anchors. So except anchor Alice and anchor Bob, which are the only outputs that can be spent directly as soon as the transaction is confirmed. And so each party, so Alice and Bob, can spend its own anchor. That's why there are different names, of course. And so why do we use these anchors? Basically, the idea is that we can we can increase the fees of the transaction by adding a child to this transaction that spends from the anchor. And basically, because so we are using something that is called child pays for parent, so CPFP. And basically, the idea is that you have this first transaction, which is called the parent transaction, and then you have a child transaction, which is spending from one of the anchors, and the overall fees of both transactions can be increased by having a high fee in the child transaction, and this way you can incentivize miners to pick up both transactions and make the confirmation of your commitment transaction faster. So that's basically the idea of CPFP in the context of lightning closing lightning channels. And so we'll cover why we need the anchors in a bit. But what are the use cases for wanting to confirm channel force closes quickly? One of them can be that the fees that are in the commitment transaction are too low. And so, for example, it would take a long time for the transaction to confirm. And as a reminder, this commitment transaction is a pre-signed transaction because it is spending funds from the channel output, which is a 2-of-2 multi-signature address. And so you need, in the context of a channel between Alice and Bob, you need two signatures, one from Alice and one from Bob, in order to spend the funds in the channel. And so that's why Alice and Bob need to find an agreement on the fees beforehand when they sign the last update of the channel. But maybe it was a long time ago, or maybe the fee just skyrocketed recently, and they are way higher now than they were like 1 hour before. And so now maybe the fees are not enough. And so you want to be able to use child pay for parent in order to increase the fee and to make the transaction confirm faster. It can be just because you want to have your funds back today and now, and not in 2 weeks, for example. And it can also be because you are in a hurry because there are some outputs in the commitment transaction that have time locks, and this time lock might expire soon. We'll cover a classical example, sorry, of that in a few minutes. So, hello, I see we've been joined by a few people. Hello, guys. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, in case you missed the beginning, quickly, what we are talking today is the fee bumping of commitment transactions when they are published on chain. Related to that is the subject of transaction pinning, which we'll cover, and we'll cover ephemeral anchors. And this is all, we are talking about this today because last week, Bitcoin Core 29.0 was released. And this release, together with the previous major release, which was 28.0, both brought a few improvements to mempool policies, which are very useful and which are not yet used in Lightning, but which will be in the future and which will make some design of the Lightning protocol better. So yes, basically this, what I just covered was basically some kind of reminder to some extent. But yes, the idea, so now why do we need these two anchors in order to be able to bump the fees of the transaction? For example, why can't we use one single anchor instead of having two? And then this single anchor could be spent by any of the parties, so by Alice or Bob. Or why can't we use the other already existing outputs? So for example, the output for Alice in order to bump the fees. And so the short answer to this question is that it's because of something called pinning attacks. And so what does the word pinning in this context mean? So a pin transaction means that it cannot be fee bumped. So basically, you cannot increase the fee of this transaction anymore. And this can have some bad consequences. For example, if the fees of the transactions are low, it can mean that you will not be able to access the funds before a very long time, for example, 6 months. And so it's costing you some time value. So it's a cost of opportunity because in the meantime, your funds are sitting unconfirmed in the mempools and you can't use them. So it's you're losing on opportunities. So it's what we call time value. And so it can be a griefing attack in this regard. But pinning attacks can also be used to, for example, steal funds from a victim. And one example of that is if the transaction is time sensitive. And for example, we covered this in a few sessions before, I guess. In Lightning, when you are routing a payment, and so you are receiving an HTLC from a node that is before you in the route, and you're sending an equivalent HTLC to a node that is after you in the route. If, for example, your channel partner closes the channel, and so you have to time out the HTLC on chain because they didn't give you the pre-image. Then you need to claim the funds in the HTLC with the timeout path on chain before the HTLC that is upstream expires as well, or else you could find yourself in a tricky situation where the node before you could have claimed the value of the HTLC when it expires, for example, off-chain, so without going on-chain. And then maybe the node that is after you, so downstream in the payment route, could come back online and claim the funds with the pre-image, and then you would have nothing, and you would have lost the value of the HTLC. And if both nodes are colluding, basically it can be the same attackers that controls both nodes, and they use this attack in order to steal funds from you. So basically the key thing to remember here is that pinning attacks can be both a griefing mechanism in order to target a victim and make them lose the time value of the funds that are in some kind of limbo state, meaning that they are unconfirmed. in the mempools, and you can't use them. Or it can even be some more elaborate attacks that can even involve mempool manipulations and things like that. And in that case, it can even be in order to steal funds from the victim. So that's why pinning attacks are quite serious, and that's why we added anchor outputs, of course. So I see we've been joined by Theo and Lunes. Welcome, guys. But to really understand pinning attacks, there are a few things we need to understand, because I said that a pin transaction is basically a transaction that cannot be fee bumped anymore. And to understand where this limitation comes from, we need to understand how mempools handle transaction replacement and fee bumping. And then which anti-DOS, so denial of service rules, were created in relation to the way mempools manage transactions and packages of transactions, and then how these rules created room for pinning attacks. So mempools, as a reminder, every Bitcoin node has its own mempool, and it's basically where all the unconfirmed transactions are waiting before they are added by some miner into a block. And when it accepts a transaction in its mempool, a Bitcoin node needs to keep track of all the ancestors and descendants of these transactions that are also unconfirmed, so that are also in the mempool. And it's easy to understand why, for example, if we take the example of a transaction which has several children transaction. So child transaction, means that it spends outputs from another unconfirmed transaction as its own inputs. So we have here a first unconfirmed transaction that takes a confirmed output, a confirmed UTXO, and creates, in this example, two new yet unconfirmed outputs. And then we can create, nothing prevents us from doing so, we can create other transactions that take these unconfirmed outputs and use them as inputs. And so in this example, we have one parent unconfirmed transaction and then two unconfirmed children transactions. And something important is that if this first parent transaction was to be, for example, replaced using, for example, RBF, so replaced by fee, then the node also needs to flush the two children transactions because they don't exist anymore, because the inputs that they are spending don't exist anymore. So that's why you need to keep track of children and parents inside the mempool. And this can be abused in denial of service attacks, because it means that you could, if there was no protections against that, you could, for free, create transactions with, for example, a lot of children, and then you replace the parent transaction, and every node that had the parent and the children in its mempool needs to do lots of computations, basically, in order to remove all the children transactions and be sure that there are no children transactions that are not linked to a valid parent, for example. And so at scale, it could be a DOS attack vector. And so that's why, in order to mitigate this kind of attacks, there are a few rules in place. So there are policy rules, which means they are not consensus rules. Each node can have its own rules, but basically that they are mostly the Bitcoin Core default rules. And these rules define how transactions can be replaced by fee, so using RBF, and how many unconfirmed descendants, so children, an unconfirmed transaction may have. And so the current RBF rules are as follow. So I kept the number one rule, but now it doesn't exist anymore, since version 29.0 of Bitcoin Core, so since last week. But basically, what the first rule said was that for a transaction to be replaceable by fee, so using RBF. So basically, RBF means you take a transaction and you double spend the transaction with a higher fee. So that's basically what it is. So while the original transaction that you made is still in the mempool, you can publish a transaction that looks a lot like the previous transaction, but pays a higher fee. And so, for example, that's something that you can use a lot if you're doing a transaction, but the fees are suddenly too high, and you need the transaction to confirm quickly. Then you can use RBF to increase the fees of the transaction and make it confirm faster. So up until last week, and it's still the case, of course, for nodes that didn't upgrade to 29.0 yet, the transaction needed to explicitly signal that it was eligible to be replaced. So that's not the case anymore for upgraded nodes, because now something that is called full RBF is the default. And basically, in full RBF, you consider that all transactions are eligible for replacement. And then you have a few more rules. And so the replacement transaction only include an unconfirmed input if that input was included in one of the directly conflicting transactions. An unconfirmed input spends an output from a currently unconfirmed transaction. So basically what it says is that you cannot add inputs to your replacement transaction. You cannot add new inputs, new unconfirmed inputs. Then there is a rule 3, which will be very important for our discussion today. And rule 3 of RBF rule states that the replacement transaction must pay an absolute fee, so not a fee rate, an absolute fee of at least the sum paid by the original transactions. And then rule 4 gives more details of what is behind the at least in rule 3. Basically, the replacement transaction must also pay for its own bandwidth. So if the minimal relay fee of your node is 1 Satoshi per vbyte, and if the replacement transaction is 500 vbytes, then the absolute fees of the replacement transaction must be the fees of the previous transaction, the transaction it is replacing, plus 500 Satoshis. So basically, it's because else you could you could replace transaction and only increase the fees from replacement to replacement by 1 Satoshi, and you could just spam the network by increasing the fees only by 1 Satoshi every time you replace a transaction. And this way, having to also pay for your own bandwidth, it makes it fall in line with what we are currently expecting when you set your own node policy and you say that your relay fee rate is 1 Satoshi per vbyte. It means that basically you are ready to relay any transaction as long as it pays this fee rate. And so it's logical to have this expectation for the replacement transaction as well. And then there is some limit on the number of original transactions that we replace. And yeah, the replacement transactions fee rate is greater than the fee rate of all directly conflicting transactions. So basically, that's for incentive compatibility. So what we call incentive compatibility when we talk about mempool policies is basically we want miners to maximize their profit, their revenue. That's what is defined as incentive compatible. And of course, if you then it means that the fee rate of the replacement transaction. Oh, actually, it's a bit different. So it's the fee rate of the replacement transaction must be greater than the fee rate of all directly conflicting transactions. So that's a bit different than what I was alluding to. Because what I was alluding to was, rule 3, actually. So you can find the source here if you want. You can check also the history of the mempool replacements.md file in order to see how it evolved. And for instance, the last version, so the one that you can access with this QR code, today it doesn't have the one anymore, the rule number 1 anymore. But if you just go back in history a few months ago, you can see that the rule 1 was still here and that it was saying this. And then there is the number of descendants rules. So yeah, if we must keep something in mind from RBF rule, it's mostly the rule 3, which says that the replacement transaction must pay an absolute fee of at least the sum paid by the original transactions, because we will see how this can be abused in order to pin transactions in a few minutes. And then there is rules about the number of descendants in the mempool. So that's what I explained earlier. So if you have one unconfirmed parent transaction and you remove it from the mempool, then you must also remove all the child transactions as well. And so in order to put a cap, a limit on how much work is required from Bitcoin nodes when this happens, there is a Bitcoin Core default policy which states that an unconfirmed transaction cannot have more than 25 unconfirmed descendants, itself included. So it means 24 children. So you can have one parent transaction and at most 24 children. And so here we have two children, but you can have grandchildren as well. For example, if you spend from the output that is created by the blue transaction, then you would have a grandchildren of the first transaction and so on. And all those children count as descendants of this first transaction. And so you cannot have more than 24 of these. Of course, it's a mempool policy, so it's on a per node basis. So 25 is Bitcoin Core's default, but you can have anything you want. But of course, we recommend following Bitcoin Core defaults, unless you have some very specific use case for having more descendants. So now we'll see how these rules can be abused in order to pin transactions. So basically, these rules were put in place in order to protect the networks against some kind of denial of service attacks. But it also means that because these rules are quite strict, an attacker can use them to prevent a target from increasing the fees of their transactions. One example of that, and so it's really occurring when several parties, several people can spend the same input, as is the case in Lightning. So, for example, you can abuse the rule 3 of RBF in order to pin a transaction. So you have here you are spending an input, and you're creating an output as a result, and then you are creating another transaction that spends this output that you just created, and this transaction here is a very big transaction, so a very big size, a lot of bytes, but it pays a low fee rate. So the Satoshi per V byte is quite low. This means that this transaction, and so the whole package will be at the bottom of the mempools, and so miners will not pick this transaction until they have cleared a lot of other transactions that pay more fees for the space they are taking in the blocks. And since rule 3 of RBF says that you need, in order to replace this original transaction, you need to pay an absolute fee, so in Satoshis, that is higher than the fees of all the transactions that you are replacing, so not only this one, but also all of its children. Then if you want to RBF what I call transaction A, you will need to pay a much higher fee than just TXA. You will need to pay TXA, the fees for TXA, plus the quite big fee of this child transaction, plus your own relief fee, but that's not a lot. And so this can be used to force a victim, for example, to pay a higher fee. So this can be some kind of griefing attack against another party. And you can also pin transactions that would like to use CPFP in order to bump the transaction. For example, here, if we had only one anchor in our channel commitment transaction, and if both parties would be could spend this anchor, so that's one of the questions we asked earlier in the session today. We asked, why do we need two anchor outputs and not only one? So here we have our answer. Since CPFP, the CPFP rules state that a transaction can only have 24 descendants, or 25 if we include itself in the count. Then if we consider Alice and Bob, and let's say Bob tries to prevent Alice from increasing the fees of the transaction, then Bob could add 24 descendants to the transaction by spending from the shared anchor, and then spending from the first child to create a grandchild, then spending from the grandchild to create a grand-grandchild, and so on and so on. And then, as soon as we have 24 descendants, Alice cannot add her own outputs to the transaction, to the anchor, in order to bump the fees of the transaction. And so Bob could add very low fee rate children, and it would prevent the transaction from being fee bumped because the overall fee rate would be too low, and the transaction would, for example, remain in the mempool for a long time. And so this can be used to pin transactions. And so that's why we introduced, so Lightning developers introduced two things. One of them is CPFP carve-out. So there is a small typo here. It's not CPCP, it's CPFP. So child pair for parents carve-out, and anchor outputs. And so anchor outputs, it's what we saw earlier. Basically, each party has their own anchor that they're the only one who can spend. So Alice, so at first, later you can, but I think it's 16 blocks. After 16 blocks, anyone can spend any of the anchors. So this is useful because we don't want the anchors to lay around indefinitely. So this way, anyone can collect anchors once they expire. But until this 16 blocks time lock expires, only Alice can spend her anchor, and only Bob can spend his anchor. And we added, so there was a special rule that was added to the CPFP rules, which says that, okay, so the CPFP rules say that you can't add a 25th child to the transaction. And CPFP carve-out says, okay, you can add one more child, so a 25th child, only if it's not too heavy. So more specifically, it must not weigh more than 1,000 virtual bytes. And it has only one unconfirmed ancestor. And so since only the anchors are spendable at first, so there is a one block time lock on all the other outputs. So only the anchors are spendable when the commitment transaction first confirms. No single party can pin the transaction, because we can see in this example that if Bob tried to pin the transaction as he did before, so before we introduced carve-out, then so he would, for example, create 24 descendants and change them after his anchor, because it's the only thing that he can spend. But then Bob cannot add a 25th child, because the CPFP carve-out rule says that the potential 25th child must only have one unconfirmed ancestor. And in that case, if Bob was to add yet another child to his chain of children, this additional child would have 24 unconfirmed parents, unconfirmed ancestors. So Bob cannot add the 25th descendant to the transaction. And he cannot do this. He cannot add this additional descendant to his own anchor. And since he cannot spend any of the other outputs, he can't add an additional output. But Alice, she can spend from the anchor. And if she was to spend from the anchor in order to, with a child transaction, this child transaction would only have one unconfirmed ancestor, which is the commitment transaction. And yes, then she just has to be sure that this transaction doesn't weigh more than 1,000 Satoshi, V-bytes, but that's no big deal. And so having one anchor for each party and the CPFP carve-out rule ensures that both parties are able to spend their to bump the fees of the commitment transactions if they want to, and no single party can prevent the other party from doing so. But if once we are in this situation where Bob has created the 24 descendants and Alice has created one to bump the fees of the transaction, then we are full and we cannot create any additional descendants for the transaction. But that's Alice only needed one child in order to bump the fees, so that's okay, and we have reached our goal. So yes, that's it for the explanation of how anchor outputs work. If you want, I have. If you want to, look at this with afterwards with taking the time to read. I have in my blog an old article from January 2022, which is called "What are anchor outputs?" So it's I just share the link on the Telegram group in the live chat channel. I forgot to add it here, but basically it's just what I told you, what I explained here, but it's in a written format. So if you want to take a look, you can. Great, awesome. If you have any question, please feel free to ask them. Once again, if you want, you can join me on stage if something is not clear, if I said something wrong or anything like that. Feel free to join me, or I see a few of you commenting on the YouTube chat. That's great. So what are some limitations of anchor outputs? One, which is quite evident, is that so they add some data to the transaction, because instead of having a typical channel commitment transaction that would just be two outputs, one for Alice, one for Bob, and then the eventual HTLC output, but it's not, you don't always have an HTLC output. Then you always have two additional outputs that are here to be able to fee bump the transaction. Each of them is 43 bytes, and you also need witness data in order to spend them later. So it takes 43 bytes in the transaction when you create them, and it will take additional space as well when you spend them. It takes a bit less space if it is spent by, because as I said, after 16 blocks, anyone can spend, but it still takes a little space. So that's for one. And for instance, so CPF, the anchor outputs work reasonably well if indeed there is something going with your channel partner and you need to bump the fees. But in a lot of cases, you don't need them, and they are here because you don't know until the time comes to publish the transaction if you will need them or not. So they are here always. And so it's not really very, very efficient. So it's something we often do in the Bitcoin space, which is to prepare for the worst outcome. But still here, it's a bit costly to have to add these two outputs to all the transactions, because often you can find transactions that have one output for Alice, one output for Bob, and two encores that take some space. Another limitation is that the CPFP carve-out special rule only works for two parties channels, and it doesn't scale for more to more parties, because the rules works for two people, because it's quite easy to implement this rule in the context of two people, because you just need to say, okay, you can add one additional descendant that is a direct child from the parent transaction. And so it's quite easy to reason about and to see that it works. But if you were to have channels with more parties, then you can't, with the similar rules, you can't ensure that every party gets a chance to bump the fees of the transaction. Because if you said, okay, you can add two additional child, then it could be abused by another party in order to prevent someone from bumping the fees. Another limitation is that under the current rules, and so it's more linked to RBF, this one, the parent transaction, so here the commitment transaction, must pay its own fees in order to be relayed on the network. So in order to be standard, the commitment transaction still needs to pay some fees, and it cannot rely exclusively on the fees that are brought by the child transaction. This means that you still need to, when you create the commitment transaction, which is anytime there is an update in the channel, you still need to find an agreement with your channel partner on what the fees are and what fees you want to commit to in this commitment transaction. And this is really something that we would like to be able to get rid of, because it creates some feedback loop between on-chain and Lightning, which is not ideal, because one of the goals of Lightning is to be able to be a bit insulated from the on-chain fees, and especially from fee spikes, if you will. So we will never be able to be completely insulated from the on-chain fee market and from on-chain congestion, but it would be nice to be able to detach Lightning a bit more from this. And as long as we need to have this fee negotiation anytime we need to update a channel, we will still have some quite strong dependency between on-chain fees and the management of channels on the Lightning Network. And additionally, this fee negotiation, when it fails, meaning both nodes, so Alice and Bob, do not agree on what the fees are and what fees must be attached to the commitment transaction. When it occurs, so one of the outcome, which were quite frequent at some point in the life of the Lightning Network, can be that one of the parties will close the channel. For example, if your node sees that you should use 20 satoshis per vbyte transaction fee in order to be sure that the commitment transaction confirms in a timely manner, and your channel partner says that for them it's only 1 sat per vbyte, you may try to do some discussions. So it's, of course, it's done automatically by the nodes. But if the other party is uncompromising, and from the point of view of your node, it's certain that 1 satoshi per vbyte will not be enough, it might be best to just force close the channel with a fee that is higher than 1 satoshi per byte and maybe a bit less than 20 sat per byte, rather than agree with the other party and go with their fee estimation, which your node thinks is very wrong. So that's why we saw a lot of force close in the past around fee negotiation. And it's actually a good thing to first close the channel if you disagree with on fees, because it could be an attack vector. And so that's why we want to get rid, ideally, of fee negotiation altogether in order to not have this force clause reason anymore. And there are also more generic limitations, for example, one of which is the lack of network-wide package relay policies. So, for example, CPFP, so the fact that you can bump the fee of a parent transaction by creating a child which pays a lot of fees, which gives an incentive for miners to include both transactions in their mempool, in their block as well. It works, but it's not perfect today with current policies. For example, one of the limitations, which I mentioned earlier, is that the parent transactions must still pay enough fees to be above the dust limit, the current dust limit. And the dust limit depends on each mempool has its own dust limit. But basically, for a default mempool, which is 300 megabytes, if the 300 megabytes are filled up, you can have a dust limit that is as 10 sats per vbyte, which means that anything that pays less fees than 10 sats per vbyte will not be included in the mempool. And so since we don't have yet, but it's coming, a network-wide package relay policies, you could still, CPFP, child pay for parent, could still fail, even with a big child that pays a lot of fees, if the fees that the parent pays are still too low with respect to the current dust limit, which evolves depending on how congested the mempools are. I hope it was clear enough. But so as I said a few times, all of this changed and is changing. And so the two last major releases of Bitcoin Core, so 28 and 29.0, brought some improvements to the mempool policies, which will make all of this work better, hopefully. Hi, Grace Satoshi. Thanks. So we have someone from Tanzania. Welcome. So what is the fix? So we saw how we use Anchor outputs and CPFP carve-out to address the limitations of CPFP. And now there is a new fix, which is in order to make anchors work better, in order to make the fee bumping of commitment transactions more reliable. But it is not limited to only this. It is a wider scope, which aims at making the replacement and the management of which transactions we accept in a mempool more incentive compatible. So which means having ways to quickly, for example, as a miner, to quickly see if a set of transactions should be included in a block or in a mempool or not, in a way that is more efficient than what we have today. And so there are a few things, a few building bricks that are used together in order to create new mempool policies. One of them is called TRUC, which stands for Topologically Restricted Until Confirmation, which is a very great name. Before that, it was called Transaction version 3 or Transaction v3, because it's an opt-in mempool policy. So it's an opt-in set of mempool policies. And so you have to explicitly, when you create a transaction, you have to explicitly signal that your transaction is following this superset of of mempool policies, and you do so by writing in your transaction that the inversion is equal to 3. So it's, you have a special bit in your transaction and you set it to 3, basically. And the fact that it is a superset of existing policies means that the rules that these 3 transactions must follow are stricter, are tighter than the classical policies. So that's what I try to represent with this little drawing. So you have the classical policies rules, and the truc, I don't know how you pronounce it in English, the truc policies include the classical policies and add a few more rules. So it's tighter, it's stricter than classical policies. Of course, another thing to bear in mind is that if you are running Bitcoin Core 29.0, so with the new topologically restricted until confirmation policies, if you see a V3 transaction, you will apply these policies to this transaction. But any node that is not updated will still use the V2 rules, because it doesn't know what are the rules for these 3 transactions. So what I mean by that is that you get the improvements of V3, which I will cover in a few moments. You get the improvements for your own mempool, but you'll have to wait until at least some critical portion of the P2P network has adopted those rules for it to become something that you can really rely on when thinking about if I publish my transaction, it will relay or not, or it will be included in a block or not, in a mempool or not. And so you may wonder why we implement stricter rules with transaction V3. The goal is precisely to try to make it more difficult to pin transactions. And this works in conjunction with full RBF. So as a reminder, full RBF is the fact that now all transactions are considered to be eligible for replace by fee, and package relay. Because package relay means that so you can consider transactions as a group of dependent transactions, for example, a parent and a child transaction, and consider the whole package instead of considering each transaction independently. So that's what that's basically the next bullet point. And for now, in Truc, we limit the size of packages to 2 transactions, one parent and one child. That's because it's really much easier to reason about, because you have to be really careful when you start to implement the more generic policies with clusters, so with packages of any size, and so that this packages of size greater than 2 will come later. It's called cluster mempool, and it will come in due course. But for now, we have what we call 1P1C, so one parent, one child package. And so we could say that one parent, one child packages are a part of the V3 transactions update. So that's one thing. So basically, we have an opt-in set of rules that are stricter than the current rules, which says that you can have, if you have a V3 transaction, it can have only one unconfirmed child, or if it is the child, you can have only one unconfirmed parent. So in other words, if you have a truc transaction, you can have only 2 linked truc transactions, only 2 linked V3 transactions that are unconfirmed at some point in time. And then you can consider them as a package when it comes to relaying the transactions. What it means is that what a package means in this context is that even if the parent transaction doesn't pay enough fees in order to reach the minimum relay fee of your node, then if the package with both the parent and the child overall pays enough a big enough fee rate, then you can your node will include it in its mempool. To put it to take a very clear example, you could have a parent transaction that, so let's say your node's mempool is configured to have a minimal relay fee of 1 Satoshi per VByte. It means that if a transaction doesn't pay enough, pays less than 1 Satoshi per VByte, you will refuse to add this transaction into your mempool. So your node will refuse to add the transaction into your mempool. But if you have updated to your node to version 29.0, and so you are recognizing V3 transactions, if you have a parent transaction that pays, for example, let's take the very clear example. If let's say the parent transaction is 200 virtual bytes and the child transaction is 200 virtual bytes as well, so they have the same weight. And let's say that your mempool is configured to only accept transaction of that pay 1 Satoshi per VByte. If the parent transaction pays 0 fee, so 0 Satoshi per VByte, but the child transaction pays 2 Satoshis per VByte, then when you take the whole package, it will pay 1 Satoshi per VByte. And so your node will accept this whole package into its mempool. So that's the power of package relay. And maybe you can start to understand how it can be useful with Lightning, because as you see in my example, the parent transaction can pay 0 fees and all the fees can be paid by the child. So this is very powerful. Another thing we have, which was introduced in version 28.0, so 6 months ago, is pay to anchor, P2A. So it's a standard way to spend a very specific output, which is defined by OP1 and this hexadecimal number. And so this kind of output is already standard to create. So it was already standard to create before version 28, because basically it's when we created version 1 of Segwit, so basically what we call Taproot, a decision was taken to say that any output that is more than 2 bytes, any Taproot output that is more than 2 bytes is standard, so it can relay. But then there was it wasn't necessarily standard to spend this output. And so the pay to anchor update, what it does is that it makes it standard to spend this specific output, which is a 2 bytes version 1 output, a version 1 Segwit output, so 2 bytes Taproot output, let's say. And it can be spent by anyone without any witness data. So and more specifically, the witness must be empty. So when you spend this output in the witness data, so basically that's where you usually put the signature of the transaction. Here you must put nothing. And so this weird hexadecimal number comes from the fact that if you take the Batch32 encoding of this, with the fact that it's a version 1, it spells the word fees. So I'll show you in a moment. So that's quite interesting as well. We'll see why. But basically, it's a way to have anchors that are quite small, that are way small, that are smaller than what we currently have. So it's even smaller than when you're spending an anchor output after 16 blocks, which means that anyone can spend. Because before, this anyone can spend meant you just had to put, I don't know exactly, but you just had to put an OP true on the witness. Now you don't put anything, so it's even smaller in size. It's literally 2 bytes. And then the last thing that was brought this time in version 29, so last week, is what we call ephemeral dust. And so it builds on transaction V3, so truck, and pay to anchor. And so now what you can do, so what we have now with version 3 transaction is that we can consider packages of size 2, so packages of 2 transactions. And we have a new type called pay, a new way to spend outputs called pay to anchor. So it can spend very specific outputs. And now we can, so no, sorry, forget about the pay to anchor stuff. It has nothing really to do with ephemeral dust. So the fact that we can now consider packages of 2 transactions, one parent, one child that are both unconfirmed, means that we can create a dust output as in the parent transaction and immediately spend this output in the child transaction. And so now that we can do that, and so we know that we don't actually create this dust output in the block where the package is included, it means that we don't really need to disallow the creation of this dust output, because the reason why we have this dust limitation, this dust limit in the first place, is that we don't want the UTXO set, so the number of outputs that exist at a given time, to be too big. And so in order to limit the size of this UTXO set, we limit, and so it is Bitcoin mempool policy, a standardness rule. So it just defines what transaction nodes will relay. We define a dust limit, which is a per node dust limit. But once again, the default values of Bitcoin Core are quite important because they are the standard. That says that, and so it depends on the size of, on the kind of output, but it gives a minimal size for an output. But it's only because we don't want to create, to allow to create a very small outputs, because then it would be very cheap to create a lot of very small outputs and to completely bloat the UTXO set. But now, if we consider just a package of two transactions and we create an output in the first, so in the parent transaction, and we immediately destroy this output in the child transactions, then it doesn't matter that this output is dust, because it will not end up in the UTXO set at all at any moment in time. So that's fine. And so we can relax the dust limit for this specific case of these 3 transactions in which the parent transaction pays 0 fee and has one child that consumes this dust UTXO and pays the fees for the whole package. So that is ephemeral dust. But as you can see, we can combine pay to anchor and ephemeral dust in order to create ephemeral anchors. So basically, we create in the parent transaction, we can create a 0 value or some value, but it can be as low as 0 anchor with this script. So basically, OP1, I don't know, BC1 P row fees GF, which is the whole string, and immediately spend this anchor in the child transaction while paying the fees at the same time. And so this could be something like that. So for to be clear, this isn't entirely specified yet. There are discussions in the Lightning community, I believe, how I believe it's not really done yet on how we will finalize ephemeral anchors and what it will look like in the end, especially when it comes to compatibility between nodes in how to create these ephemeral anchors. But basically, the idea is that we could get rid of the one block time lock on other outputs. And for example, you would have something like that. So you publish the commitment transaction that could look something like that. So with only one ephemeral anchor that anyone can spend, because you don't need any witness data to spend it, so anyone can spend it. And one example could be that Alice could spend it, and since there is no time lock on her output, that's a bad example because there is a time lock on Alice's output on Alice's version of the transaction. So let's say she's spending from Bob's commitment transaction. So Bob publishes this commitment transaction, and then Alice can spend from her own output because it doesn't have any time lock, and use some part of the funds that come from her output in order to pay the fees for this second transaction here that spends from both her output and spends also the ephemeral encore, because else the package will not be valid, will not be standard. And so this way, Alice could bump the fees of the transaction, and she could do so without having to have any additional funds lying around in order to fund the child transaction. She could use the funds coming directly from the channel, which is quite interesting and quite powerful, because that's one of the big subject of improvement in Lightning, which is to get rid of this idea that you need to have a stash of funds at hand in order to be able to bump the fees of commitment transactions. And so with this, we kind of strike two birds with one stone. First, we have, instead of having two encores, which take quite some space, we only have one ephemeral encore, so which takes a minimal space. I don't think we can get any smaller than, we can have an output that is any smaller than that, which is instantly spent, so it doesn't encumber the UTXO set, even for 16 blocks. No, it's spent immediately. It doesn't really exist, let's say, not in the UTXO set. And we can fee bump the transaction, and both parties can fee bump the transaction, because Bob can also use the ephemeral encore to fee bump the transaction, thanks to package relay and package RBF. So basically, the fact that now we have package relay, you can RBF so the whole package. And for example, if Bob wanted to bump the fees, he could create a conflicting transaction that pays higher fees, and Bob's transaction would be included in the block rather than Alice's if Bob pays more fees. And so it completely removes pinning attacks as well. So yeah, that's it for ephemeral encores. I just wanted maybe to quickly show you where I can do this, where the this weird chain of this weird hexadecimal numbers come from. So it's a 2 bytes hexadecimal number. And if you go to this website, so slowly.github.io/base32 buffer, basically it lets you input any data, a script version. So here we need version 1 because we are using SegWit version 1, aka taproot. And as you notice, it says that for version 0, so SegWit, native SegWit, the script should have length 20 or 32 bytes. That's because for SegWit version 0, we redefined as standard scripts between 20 and 32. But for taproot, so for SegWit version 1, there isn't such a limit, and you can have something as little as 2 bytes, which is considered standard. And so, for example, this chain of character. And so let me refresh the page so that you can see it happen in real time. It doesn't remove the... Okay. So for example, if I hit script version 1, I take this hexadecimal number, so 4E73, copy. I put it here. I click encode, and you can see that it returns BC1P. So that's something we expect from a taproot address. And then phi and then there is this row and GF, which also can make you think of girlfriends if you're into that as well. So yeah, that's where this comes from. And so there was a whole process before choosing that in order to be sure that there wasn't any other use case for 2 bytes. Yeah, I'm going to share the link. Indeed, thank you, Alphonse. There was, for example, I saw a Stack Overflow question by some Bitcoin developer to check that there wasn't anyone else using 2 bytes taproot scripts for any other use case. And so apparently it's nobody is using this kind of stuff. And so that's why they settled for this, because 2 bytes is the smallest size you can use for the script. And this one is nice because you have the word fees in it. And we started to see it appear on the blockchain. So of course, so this is mempool.space for the address BC1P fees row girlfriend, which I shared in the Telegram group as well. And as you can see, there is still some usage. So what is the timeline? It's all. Okay, I thought there were more transactions like that. One thing to keep in mind is that what we talked about is only standardness rules. So you can see transactions to this address that are not really necessarily V3 transactions, because some miners might have picked them anyway because they don't enforce policies as strict as Bitcoin Core defaults. But you may also start to see version 3 transactions as well that use this address to as an anchor output, and not necessarily as an ephemeral anchor, but as an anchor output. And that's why the mempool.space website already shows that the type of this address is anchor. So yeah, that's it for today. I think we can, yeah, it's been more than 1 hour. We can conclude here. I had a few more things that I wanted to share. So here are the release notes for Bitcoin Core 28 and Bitcoin Core 29, which contain basically, so they don't always detail all the changes, of course, because there are some changes that are smaller than others. But as you can see, in 28, we had transaction with version 3 numbers, so basically truck transactions, and pay to anchor, and limited package RBF. So limited here means that we only consider clusters or packages of size 2. So basically, that was the first part, which was released in 28.0. And now, since last week, since 29.0, we have the concept of ephemeral dust, which combined with with pay to anchor leads to the ability to develop ephemeral anchors, which is not yet there, of course, because we still need to be integrated into the Lightning protocol. So that's the BIP for trucks transaction. That's okay. Yeah, another thing that I wanted to share maybe is Gustavo Flores HAS, which developed a website called Sovereign Tools, and which basically takes a few properties, a few key aspects of a wallet, and creates a table with various wallets in order to quickly see what are some limitations of some wallets and stuff like that. So it's entirely open source. So I share the link in the Telegram group as well. So I wanted to share that because I think, for example, if you wanted to, for example, if you spot something and you think that something is wrong or something is not very up to date, you can just go to the GitHub, open a pull request, for this. For example, one example, I opened a pull request last week because Phoenix was marked as being not available everywhere, and especially not in the US. And now Phoenix is back in the US, so that's one of the great news from the last 2 weeks as well. And so feel free if you see anything that or can be improved or anything like that, feel free to open a pull request, because I think that this kind of projects are very useful. It can also be a nice project for someone from the lab to start reviewing this and contribute. And the fact that it is open source and the whole database is also open source is great. So yeah, that's the GitHub. And one last thing maybe is that now the Breeze SDK, which we covered quite a few times already, so more specifically the Breeze nodeless SDK, which uses swaps with Liquid Network, now supports WebAssembly, which is quite a big news, because so I'm sharing the link as well. It means that you can basically run it in every browser or everywhere that JavaScript runs, Node.js run more specifically. So it's great as well. Maybe we can try in some later project in the lab to create something cool with this SDK. But it's really big news. And if you are interested, there are some fairly technical details on how they made it happen, and it involved a lot of refactoring and stuff like that. So yeah, really hats off to the team. Because that's some big impressive work. Awesome. Great. I'm going to bring back the QR from the beginning so that you can join the Telegram group if you're interested. And with that, I think I can say you goodbye. No, there is actually one thing quite important. I will be sharing in the Telegram chat more practical exercises, probably using Polar. So I've yet to really finish specifying all of that. But the idea is that we can see each other not in 2 weeks, but next week. And not on YouTube, but in a more private meeting. So it will be something like a Google Meet or a Zoom, but we have some tools for that at Plan B. And this way we can, since the meeting will not be recorded, we can have more we can just have discussions about the exercises without the fear of saying something wrong or asking a question that you're not sure. I don't think there are any dumb questions, but I think you get my point. I understand that it can be quite intimidated to come on stage with me, ask questions and stuff like that. So that's why I think we can try next week. I think at the same time, so 16, so 4 p.m. CET, which is I think now 2 p.m. UTC. But yeah, it's 4 p.m. CET for sure. So I'll send the exercises on the Telegram group quite quickly, to probably tomorrow. And so the idea would be that if you're interested, you can take a look at them, try to solve them. Feel free to send me a message or send others in the group a message in the Telegram chat if you're stuck or if there is anything that isn't clear. And the idea is that we can take a look at the exercise together during something like 1 hour next week. And you can present what you did and stuff like that. And then we'll review the exercise the week after, but this time in a setting like the one we are in today, so with on YouTube and stuff like that. But this way we can have a more intimate conversation all together. And so it will be next week at 4 p.m. CET. And I will share the link of the conference call in the Telegram group as well. So once again, join the Telegram group if you want to take part in that, because that is where the fun will happen. Great. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks, Geoffroy. Thanks, Alphonse. Thanks, Arslan. Thanks, Jui Wali. And thanks, Gray Satoshi, or even Crypto. I don't know how you want to be called. Thanks, Theo. Thanks, Lunes. Thanks a lot, everyone. And yeah, see you, hopefully see you next week, or see you even before that on the Telegram group. Bye-bye, everyone.